Well, thank you so much for being here, Bill. Super appreciate your accepting my invitation and our invitation for this purpose of hopefully catalyzing capital into impact real estate. And so to our audience, I'm very honored and grateful to introduce mentor and pioneer in the field of regenerative development, Bill Reed. He's a founding member of the U.S. Green Building Council, also co-creator of the LEED Green Building Certification, principal at Regenesis Institute, principal at the Place Fund. Just really somebody that has been doing this for a lifetime now, really. And we're very interested in listening to his perspective on impact real estate. We're calling it impact real estate, but we're pushing for regenerative villages and regenerative developments and regenerative projects. So thank you so much for being here, Bill. First
Yes.
off, yeah, first off, I mean, maybe just share a little bit more just about yourself with the audience. I know I did a little bit of a quick intro, but whatever else you'd like to add, we're happy to hear. I'm pretty sure that most people already know you, but it's always good to hear from you.
Sure. I'll make it relatively quick. I'm a recovering architect and planner, and most of my career has been focused on alternative architecture, alternative energy, moving from alternative energy then to green buildings as more of a whole system, then an understanding that we had to integrate a lot more than just the stuff and technologies and buildings, and that led to integrated systems design. And with the question, where do we stop integrating? Where does one stop integrating? And if you take a moment to think about that, the full meaning of the word, we never do. When are we fully integrated? When are we whole? If you feel that's an important aspect to life, which I do.
Hmm.
So it becomes a metaphysical journey. And so real estate has become, for me anyway, in Regenesis, a major entry point into working with a whole living system. There's agriculture, there's business, of course. Uh, Not many people are doing it from a real estate point of view because the project, in fact, gets in the way. The project,
Mm,
the opening, and now I'm getting into a kind of a speech, but the
it's
project
okay.
is the project is the acupuncture point to engage people in meaningful community and relationship, not just anthropocentric, but the relationship between people and all other living entities. The project emerges from that. So when we actually are hired by a developer, which is our primary business source, most nonprofits, most municipalities are, with the bureaucracies in place, are unable to think holistically. They think in fragments. So interestingly enough, we had assumed that those would be our major clientele when we started this firm, but it's really at-risk real estate developers who take the risks. And
Mm,
the risks initially were, how do we do it better? Or how do I leave a legacy? Or how do I think systemically? Or yeah, well, so that leads to, so there are some developers who realize I am in control of my future, and is there a way to do it better? And so those are the people that hire us, and whatever better means. Now, most people think, well, most people don't understand what sustainability is, and so they certainly don't understand what regeneration is. So it's a surprise discovery process for most clients when they're in the middle and they realize, as one developer said to me, my minister doesn't get away with saying the shit you say, Bill. So as he fired us. And, but that same developer hired us a year later, and we did many other projects with him. So uh, the many people that fired us, every one of them rehired us within a year. So I think that's an interesting, not a great business model, but an interesting testament to the power of this work once you start really internalizing it.
100%, 100%. And I can vouch for that in my own journey. I mean, it's quite triggering. It can be quite challenging, as you're learning and, having been mentored by yourself and others, and just now about 4 years, a little bit over 4 years into it. I mean, for me, it was trigger. And, after I completed the TRP, I remember the last day practically crying after the intensive, and going to myself, oh, well, now what am I going to do with all of this, and how am I going to implement it? But it's sort of one of those things that once you see, you cannot see. And I think of it as a human being, if you want to develop yourself, if you want to become a better human, you kind of just continue. And I would see it the same way as a project. If I'm a real estate developer and I would like these projects to truly be better, and I understand that this work exists and it can be done, why put it off? And then we can go into the willpower and all that. But you mentioned before we go into the impact real estate component, really want to touch on something. I mean, most people don't understand sustainability and then regeneration. So, can you, from your perspective, when I say the word regeneration, what does regeneration mean to you? What is regenerative
Yeah,
development for us?
good. Well, I think it's important to describe. Most people think 98%, to name an arbitrary percentage, think that regeneration means restoration.
Hmm.
And it does. It does include that. You can't not restore. But what does restoration mean? And so restoration means that we're restoring the self-organizing capability of an ecological subsystem to evolve. That's what restoration means. So you're putting a critical mass of species and species relationships together, let's say in a wetland or a beach dune system or a forest or a riparian corridor, and there's a critical enough mass where nature takes over and starts uh, filling the ecological niches that have been damaged. So the question is, what's humans' role in that? And we can restore something. We can exercise that restoration capability. Lots of people are doing it, and I'm grateful they are doing it. The question is how do we actually learn to, as a community and in a place, learn to adapt as things change? And especially in an era of climate change now, things are rapidly changing. And so how do we not just build it back better, which you never can, or we're going to build it back stronger or less resistant or more resistant to fire, let's say, more resistant to hurricanes. That's what we would call resiliency, and that's necessary too. But the question is how do we actually learn to live and evolve with life? So regeneration is building the capacity, the practice of regenerative development is building the capacity to participate in a co-evolutionary relationship with life. And that means not just nature out there, that means with each other too.
Hmm.
So this requires us to then go right in here, because unless we are actually evolving ourselves, we are not going to succeed in evolving the rest of the world. So it's a pretty rich whole system. Self, groups of people who are effectively working together, because that's how we get things done, not as individuals, but as groups, teams, companies, organizations, and then for what purpose? What system are we working on? So we call that 3 lines of work in our practice: self, group, and system. All those 3 need to be in play and developing, evolving. So that's the practice of regeneration. The building, the project, the infrastructure, whatever we're working on, typically brings out community members who don't want it or don't agree, but nobody agrees. And so you have 25 different disagreements out there. How do you choose? And what we do is we don't work on problem solving, we work on the potential for a flourishing system. And that brings all these different people together with a common North Star. And that we're building a field of coherence and collaborative effort to be much more effective than just doing it one project at a time. So these
Hmm.
projects are acupuncture points to engage a much larger system of change in the community. I think I'll stop there. I'll keep going.
No, beautiful, beautiful. I love it. And I've fallen in love with the work myself. And I wanted the audience to understand, what regeneration, and I say to us because this is also the methodology and the approach that I've adopted as a result of my schooling with Regenesis and with you. So, now the conversation that we like to address here is, how do we get these projects to get funded? How do we catalyze capital into these projects? And you've been doing this for the majority of your life out there, and I believe that we're now in the space where it's absolutely needed, probably more than ever. And I do personally feel like there's been, just in the 4.5 years that I've been in the work, I have seen a lot of change, and I've seen like the movement growing, but I'm still not seeing the money flowing where it needs to flow,
Right.
right?
Agreed.
so
Agreed.
so we're calling it, and we didn't want to use the word regenerative, or we're kind of like pondering around it because of the fact that maybe some people might not identify themselves with that, but impact real estate. When we say impact real estate, what comes to mind for you? What do what do you think? What is impact real estate for you? Is that maybe the right way for us to call it? But essentially, we would like capital to flow into these incredible projects that really want to make the world and humanity a better place. And so,
Yeah, I'll give my stump speech on that. Most impact investing, I'm just going to say it is bullshit.
okay.
Um, they aren't really, those impact investors, those family funds who talk about impact are only interested in their return. If they can gloss it over and calling it being a good doobie, they
Mm-hmm.
say on a show called Romper Room, um, there, then that works. But the idea of impact investment should be to take a risk on impact,
Mm-hmm.
not look for proof that impact will happen.
Exactly.
So I'm very cynical about impact investors because I have yet to meet a true impact investor. I think they're out there, but they are very rare.
Mm-hmm.
So what I see are investors who really care, and they don't bother calling themselves impact. They
Okay.
they just call themselves they care, and mostly because and so there's another point now that I've been cynical. Let me actually spin it in another way, is that if you work regeneratively, there's a lot less risk
Mm-hmm.
than doing it as business as usual. And that's the hard part for people to really understand because they want to know, they ask for proof that it works. Certainly we can demonstrate this by a number of projects now, but they say, well, tell me how it's going to work on my project or on this project. And we can't do that because life is emergent. All we can do is talk about a process. And the process is never you can't dictate human nature with all the variables of life going on. The only thing you can do is surf what I call surfing emergence. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
perfect analogy because you can't control the wave, you can't control the weather, you can't control the way the wave breaks um, or the currents, but you respond and you stay upright. And that's the way this works too. So this is a surfing project. And everybody knows how to surf, or not everybody, but surfers know how to surf. It's not that difficult in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's a skill, just like this is a skill. And so what people need to understand is that if we are working with life, no one's in charge.
Mm-hmm.
No one has control. No one has control even when they think they have control. We're always subject to the vagaries and variables of life. So this process, the processes that we use actually allow you to understand what is going on in such a way. The frameworks we use help you to understand what's going on in such a way that you can respond and adjust as
Mm-hmm.
you go along.
Adapt and
Now,
adapt.
is that proof? It doesn't prove anything to anybody. But I can say that if you to quote Tyson Yunkaporta's in his book Sand Talk, that instead of so one of the paradigms he uses is respect, connect, reflect, direct. We in Western society direct,
Mm-hmm.
and people are, by the way, when you show a plan, a beautiful plan, and say, this is what we're going to build in your community. We've hired the best architect we know. It's magnificent. You're going to love it. No one loves it. Why would they love something that you come up with?
Mm-hmm.
And you haven't really spent the time um, respecting people and then connecting with them to understand them and then reflecting with them to then figure out what needs to get built. So what happens is we direct and then we then have to reflect. What did we do wrong? Then we connect, we learn more. That's amazing. And then there's respect. But that takes 3 or 4 years and lots of lawyers. So most conventional development projects are time consuming and costly, but it's what we know how to do. Our work, we have averaged about 18 months faster time to market in our work. And people say, well, that sounds great. How are you going to do that? We can't tell you. So what we can tell you is that we make a commitment to the community and the developer that the developer deserves a profit. They're taking
Exactly.
risk.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Nature works with a profit. There's nothing wrong with a profit. There's a problem with avarice capital but making a profit, a fair profit, is nothing wrong with that. Now, the community, that's all the developer deserves. The developer does not deserve to tell the community what gets built. The community and the developer have to decide together what is most appropriate for the community, as long as the developer makes a profit. And that we have never seen fail. Never seen it fail. Now that's an incredibly obnoxious statement, but it's true. As long as people, the qualifier is as long as people have the willingness to sit down and co-discover instead of try to win. So this is not about winning and losing. This is co-discovering a harmonization that's best, that actually it allows the developer to succeed better than they would have imagined, and the community to succeed better than they would have imagined. That's what we call harmonization, not compromise. All right, I'm going on too long. I'll stop.
No. That's you know, it's never enough to hear it. I mean, it doesn't matter how much you're in the work, it really is never enough to hear it. And, you know, to know that if people were actually to commit, if developers and project owners were actually to, you know, have the willingness to really embrace this process, if you will, how much better they can do. And the proof is in the pudding. And then, you know, you mentioned something, you know, surfing, and I'm thinking, you know, we all have to surf through life, you know, so, you know, this
Sure, exactly.
so it's, you know, about embracing, you know, surfing along, and, you know, in this process of discovery of ourselves and of, you know, of this project and of this land and of these people. And you know, for me, it's become, I guess, a passion and purpose, you know, the fact of protecting the locals and protecting the locality and making sure that we are really designing in a way that is bringing all of the stakeholders together and expanding that potential. So thank you for sharing all of that. Now, going into the projects that you have seen that have been successful on the funding component part, like you mentioned, there's a lot of projects that have been successful. Tell me a little bit about the funding challenges that, you know, you have encountered. I believe and I understand, you know, you have the place fund and are working with something there. Funding challenges, projects that have been funding. What are they doing right? What have they done right to get funding? Just dive a little bit deeper into that aspect.
Well, so the funding, the place fund, we have yet to be funded for the place fund for the very reasons we discussed at the beginning, that most impact investors are not really interested in impact.
Hmm.
And you know, this is a crazy new idea, right? What's this regeneration stuff? You know, in reality, it's still a real estate play. And so I circle back that as long as the people that have hired us have control of the land. The land is an asset. You can borrow against that. So most developers are who hire us are already funded with their own land deal, strict real estate deal, and afterwards they come in and say, "Oh yeah, I would like to do it regeneratively." So selling regeneration is difficult because it's this crazy new thing. But if you just sell a real estate project and then do it regeneratively, no one knows the difference. In fact, it works out better. So I'm inclined not to try to sell regenerative real estate, just for a real estate project, but just make sure you do it differently and then tell the story.
Okay. Okay.
Because most investors are very low risk takers in any kind of, I mean, it's the nature of the business. And anytime you throw some new variable or concept in the mix, that freaks them out. So, do you ask your electrician how electricity works when they're working in your house? No, you just trust them. So, hire architects or you know, people like Regenesis who are doing this work, like yourself, and basically just let them go to work. Don't try to explain what you're doing. Just say, well, you're going to have this better outcome. Now, when you're working with municipalities and bureaucracies, they do require a much more disciplined or obvious process. So that's where it gets a little tough. And this is where private developers who really aren't beholden to any bureaucracy, they're our dominant clientele. Is that making sense?
It is making sense. I'm thinking about, well, one of the things that came to mind is, well, I know some projects that have land, and I know others that are trying to buy land and get that land funded for regenerative projects. So it's like that we're working on both levels. And I've always said, well, first need to have the land, but I do know that there are a lot of people in the space that have incredible visions, if you will, and beautiful decks, but we're still working on getting that land funded. So that
Yep,
funding is not
you're
even
right.
there.
That's all over the place. And the same thing with us. So I, if I were you and I were any people interested in this, I would just say that we're doing a very good real estate project and leave it at that. And if they want to know how, well, you can tell them. But the proof is in the pudding, as we say. And the proof is that when you're working with community in this way, with a common goal of a thriving ecosystem and social system, it makes life so much easier. You will, we've never seen, maybe we have never seen that fail. No, we have seen it fail sometimes, but in general, the vast majority of projects, people are thrilled to work this way once they see that we are seriously, we're not just selling, we're not just shills trying to sneak something in. We really care, and that care comes through, and that begins to affect relationships, and that allows things to generally transpire. Although I remember in one project years ago in the early 2000s, we were working on the first constructed treatment wetland, or one of the first ones in New Jersey. It took a year and a half to get that through. That treatment, we had approval for the site. Otherwise, oh, I got to tell you this whole story then. So it took a year and a half, and basically, I remember the meeting. The chairman of the Department of Health was red in the face because he was convinced that mosquitoes were going to grow in this. And we said, well, no, it's a subsurface wetland. There's no water exposed. And he said, oh, okay. So we were delayed a year and a half because of one misperception.
Wow.
But I'll tell you, so we did 3 projects for this school. On the 3rd project, the client, Mark Bedron, who passed away a few years ago, but Mark approached he had a 20-foot setback, let's say, from the front street. And he went to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and kind of a funny story. It also makes me a little emotional. The lawyer, as Mark got up at 8 o'clock in the evening, because these things are usually in the evening, Mark got up to present, and the lawyer said, what are you doing here, Mark? Mark said, well, I'm on the agenda. I've got to present. He said, well, Mark, we don't want you here. And Mark said, okay, I'll bite. What's going on? And the guy said, seriously, we don't want you here. And I'll tell you why. The reason why is because we don't need you to be here. That this is the first that you have shown us through these other 2 projects that you've done. You've lifted our county up way beyond any environmental criteria that we would have asked for. You've taught us what to do. You've moved the community. You've changed the nature of this ecosystem.
Beautiful.
So he said, we are hereby granting you carte blanche. You never need to come before us again, because whatever you do, we know it'll be better than what we've asked for. So
beautiful.
You tell me how much that's worth.
Everything, really, everything. And
so you see that this kind of work becomes so powerful, it begins to permeate, build a field of new understanding. That's the real
that's the real outcome there. Now, the projects that you've been engaged with, well, obviously there's the government projects and then there's the private projects. I guess in the experience that you've had, generally the investors are going to ask for that ROI, and they're going to, the money needs to come from somewhere, and that somewhere is going to be. So if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is, okay, let's design a real estate.
Hang on, Francis, hang on a second. Sorry about that.
That's okay. No worries.
Okay.
So they still need to, what you're saying is, okay, well, just think about it as designing, you're proposing, and you're bringing in an offering memorandum, if you will, for a real estate project. So it just needs to have all of the components that a traditional real estate project would have, with the returns. But then we can add that regenerative component to it. And, we know that it's going to be lesser time, and it's going to be generally on average of 10% less costly than what the traditional project would
I wouldn't
cost.
say I wouldn't say 10%. I would say 2% is our experience.
Okay.
If you use LEED as a rating system, the early years of LEED, when I was doing it actively, um, we would average 2% less than conventional construction for LEED Platinum.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then, of course, you have the operation costs. So you have time to market, capital cost reduction, and operating costs.
Mm-hmm.
What's not to like?
What's not to like? What's not to
Well,
like?
but what's not to like is, oh, it's a different process, one that we're not used to. Prove to me that it works. Well, I just did, but people are nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And it is about changing that paradigm, changing. I mean, we are going through a process right now where there's a lot of things that need to change, and it's a paradigm shift, and it's
yeah,
allowing yourself to embrace the work and to embrace things from a different perspective, seeing through new eyes, if you will.
yeah.
Um, and so what projects, in your experience, I'd say, that have been successfully funded and are maybe like some of your favorite, what are the projects that you would say, these are something that we as a group and all of us that are in this movement and trying to catalyze these projects, what should we be looking at for examples?
Well, there's a few. I mean, all of them have lessons learned, but in terms of full, what I would call regenerative projects, where the capability, the community is building capability to see each other and be in relationship in a new way with each other and the world around them, would be Las Salinas in Chile,
Okay.
the Willow School in New Jersey that I just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
um, Playa Viva, I know you know that project.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Metro Vancouver, we did 2 wastewater treatment plants. Now that it's not the only government project that we've had, but they're the most long-lived. They were both 4-year projects for us,
Mm.
2-year, no, 2-year and 4-year. And we left with a reconciliation with one of the First Nations people and new environmental laws, ecological laws that would never have been born if it wasn't for what we were doing. And that came out of a wastewater treatment plant
Mm.
and then ongoing relationship with the communities in doing so. Um, Brattleboro Food Co-op. These are all kind of ones that I normally talk about. Loretto Bay, which
Mm-hmm.
is considered a failure by many because it went bankrupt 3 times, but that didn't have anything to do with the environmental issues. And the communities are still evolving. The HOA is actually a really good HOA, the homeowners association, and they are continuing to pursue the core issues that we taught them initially, that the architect Irie Kunlund taught them from our work. Um, oh my goodness. Uh, those are the best ones, but we've worked on a lot of projects. So, there's 8 of us out there working or have been. Now there's about 12. And there's projects that my colleagues have worked on that I haven't, that are not
Mm-hmm.
in my, but there's uh, Bureau of Land Management is a big project in Nevada that was quite successful in transformation of what it was supposed to do and saved a lot of money.
Mm.
Uh,
Okay.
a number of developments in New Mexico and Arizona. Mexico has had a lot of projects in Mexico that have been transformational in terms of the practitioners, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily what has been realized. Um, we're working on one project, Rio Chama, where the mayor just said, I want this 17 kilometers of river to be restored. We said, well, you got to work upstream. And that's where the government has problems because
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
this is my boundary.
This is
Well,
my
it
territory, and
doesn't
this
work that life
is
doesn't work that way.
no, it's
Uh,
yeah. I've,
so there's but all of the projects have left people with a new paradigm. Even though they're not practicing the paradigm, they know that one exists.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And listen, there's a lot more. We've done 300 projects, but the ones that where we have the real deliverable for regeneration is not the project, but it's the capacity of people to co-evolve.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we change the world. Project by project is a very slow way to go. But if you can actually drop this pebble in the pond and
Mm-hmm.
go out, that's
And
what
that's really the
that's what
change
we're.
of consciousness.
I mean, we're working in Scotland right now in 22,000 acres in the Highlands. Um, there's a all these private landowners who own about the same amount of land, they're banding together now to create a whole system. Not
Beautiful.
because of us, but we're helping to support that and getting our client, a hotelier in Portugal, working with an architectural association in Belgium. Where else are we working right now? An island in the St. Lawrence River in Montreal, a whole island.
Mhm.
Um,
And-
a project in Mexico along the West Coast, not close to Playa Viva.
Mhm.
And I mean, just today, the things are really ramping up. Two gigantic projects came in from Brazil and one from Peru.
Beautiful. So
That just
things are
happened in the last 3 hours.
amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that. So things are growing, and these are mainly so the funding for these projects. I mean, the ones that are not government projects. So I know Playa Viva. Actually, we had a little bit of a conversation on this a couple of days ago. But the other projects primarily they are from private investors that are just open to taking that risk. Really, it's not there hasn't necessarily been a specific set of criteria guidelines they just I've decided to really embrace this process in the majority of the
Well,
cases.
well, take Playa Viva, for instance. David did not understand what he was getting into.
Mm,
I mean, it took, I don't know how long, a year of conversations with David before he hired us. And he had some aha moments on the phone. And then we came down there. He still didn't quite know what was happening, but within a couple hours, it shifted to the relation. He realized that the village is not just a place to have people come work, to hire people from to work in the eco resort. The village was the point. And so
hmm
the concept became villaging. How do we village? How do we create a village? And that David just ran with that. I mean, brilliantly, brilliantly.
Brilliantly, brilliantly. I mean, it is my favorite project and my go-to project.
Oh, it should be.
As I tell David, I said, it's my tangible go-to, still doing, still evolving, and just I can't wait to see how it continues to evolve. Um, but again, going back to that component of the funding part for these other projects, it's been again the investors, having that possibility of being open to embracing the process really, because they have the money and they don't necessarily come up with a set of like, I need to have this return. Obviously, there's a lot of conversations going
Well,
on
there's
between.
return. It has to have a return. There is nothing, we have zero, there is zero resistance to that concept. It needs to have a return.
Are you seeing an average like return or like what
Can
would
be
be the
anything.
what you would look at or what are all of these sort of I would say main, if you will, touch points that
All right.
would have
Now
to be
let's go back to impact investing.
there. Okay.
If you're really concerned about impact, you ought to be accepting 10%, 8 to 10% of your
Okay.
mind. You ought to be. Now, can you get 15, 20, 30, 25%, 30%? Sure. But you just depends on your market.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Very
Depends on
true.
your market and depends on what level of investment you choose to make to get that return. But the regeneration has little, I mean, our work, Francis, initially runs anywhere from 60 to $150,000 and maybe another 50,000 for integration to keep you at the low level.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in most projects, that's white noise.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
mean, so the real question is, what do you care about?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question. Not how much money I'm going to make, but what do you care about? And well, what do you care about and how much money am I going to make? Because that's an equation that needs to be balanced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
I don't see many impact investors really stating what they care about. Because if
Mm.
they did, I can tell you that there's a few funds out there they're calling themselves SDG oriented funds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you get, 2 or 3 SDGs, well, pardon me, that's bullshit too. You ought to get all 17.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not getting all 17, and well, that's a little bit of a stretch, at least 16. But the point of this is that the project over time will affect all SDGs.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what comes in at a deliverable. So the other thing that we mentioned and is important is that there's a difference between what you're measuring as output And then out comes 3 to 5 years. What happens if I remove the nitrogen or from nitrates from the stream? Well, the stream will be less turbid. Maybe different grasses will grow back. Gravel will be clean. The trout will be able to lay eggs. So those are outcomes, not just of measuring nitrogen in the stream.
Not a
And
deliverable, not a
what's
metric,
the
but
impact?
outcome.
The impact, maybe 8 years
Huge.
later, the salmon come back.
It's huge.
So, and then again, most impact investors are not measuring impact; they're measuring output. So that's another
That's true. That's
clarification.
another way to look at it.
The market is very sloppy. That's another reason why impact investing is, it's hard to even use that term because there's so many different meanings of what impact is. And so at least defining that, outputs, outcomes, impact, and then nested systems, the project, the proximate whole, meaning the community or in the watershed. How are we affecting that and how are we actually receiving value from those systems and adding value to those systems? Because until we're adding value to those larger systems and receiving value from those systems, we're not working with life on its own terms.
Yeah, we're not being regenerative in that regard. And it's quick touch point on it. I mean, look, we're talking about impact and talking about SDGs, ESG. What's your take on that?
Well, ESG is a measurement of ESG measures the performance of a company, not real performance. And companies can play that game all the ESG. Most serious people consider ESG whitewashing. You can play all sorts of games. The important thing about ESG, though, and I'm glad the term exists, is the environmental social governance. Governance does not mean you give a report to a senior VP that sits on the desk and then you distribute a report, which is what most people would call governance. Governance means that's the real secret to this work, is building the capacity in the community to self-govern. Not the company, the community, places.
The communities.
So I love the G in ESG. Would that we started practicing it.
Practicing it from that perspective. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, it's been a wonderful conversation. I mean, I could go on forever about this and a lot more, but I'd love to just ask you one, is there other people that you think we should be talking to? Do you have any other recommendations or recommendations, to us that are this group of I would say very excited regenerators or wanting to be regenerators, or people that really would like to see these projects come to life, and maybe we don't have the resources as of yet. What can you tell us? How do we get there? How do we get to the point where we can hire me, and all of us that are here, and get these projects going? What do we need to do from your perspective, aside from having the willpower and the willingness to continue?
Well, I don't know how to answer that question. There's a lot. Listen, there's so many people talking about this these days. I'm unfortunately, I think a lot of them are selling this process short, but they're still talking about it, and that's a good thing. I would just say be careful of who you hire, because what they need to be delivering is that capacity building. The project is an outcome of that process. So you have to lead with what you're really concerned about, what's necessary, because the only way we'll have a sustainable condition is to build that capacity in human beings. Okay, that isn't what you asked. So you're asking for who's out there specifically?
Well, we can who should we be talking about? Is there any other people that you believe we should be talking to about this, this subject matter of impact real estate, and also, as far as
I think you should.
anything else?
I think there's a lot of people waving their arms talking about regeneration. I know there is. I know there are.
But we know that for sure.
Yeah, but who's actually been working on projects, and what do they consider their deliverable?
Okay.
That's the question. And I mean, the whole bioregional movement is growing. That's a little bit. I really appreciate it. I love that people are motivated by it, but it still comes down to place by place. The places in a bioregion are the nodes of transformation. The bioregion can actually be a kind of a greater whole.
Yeah, that's
so
how I view it.
Yeah, you got to be careful about that. but there's a lot of people working in that realm now in England and the States.
Mm,
And I would tune in Samantha Powers and the BioFi movement, the biofinancing movement. I would say I would definitely tune into that because their heart and practice impulses are in the right place.
mm.
Uh,
It's wonderful that you mentioned that because I know I've become engaged with the bioregional movement just kind of in the past year through Joe Brewer and then also with BioFi Hub and just learning a little bit more about it. But then, it's a lot of it is about ecosystems restoration, but I'm looking about it at it from the perspective of how can I take a real estate anchor project and that supports this bioregional movement, if you will. So it's sort of integrating what we're doing into the bioregional movement. And so thank you for
well,
sharing that.
we're doing that in Costa Rica right now. That we're basically working on one project, but we're networking a number of projects with people with that impulse in the bioregion. So that's happening naturally, actually.
Beautiful, beautiful,
Well, yeah, I mean, Andrew Pollard has definitely got that kind of ethos uh, behind him. And he's
beautiful.
not, he'd be the first to say he's not a developer. He's wants to do the right thing, and he knows how to move money around. So that's his strength
That certainly
and
helps a lot.
marketing strength. So, well, I think that's it. That's all. We don't need to belabor that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I super appreciate your time. Always a pleasure and an honor, and always a lot of fun speaking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support and throughout this process of becoming, as you called it one day for myself, which I've very much embraced. And we look forward to continuing this journey and seeing where what emerges in the future and how we can continue to catalyze and get the money to the right people and to the right places and in a regenerative in a way that we can develop projects that are truly regenerative and in line with this approach, which I believe to be the right approach. So thank you so much, Bill.
Thank
Um,
you, Francis. Me too. And I hope this has been a little useful for you.
It's been very useful. It always is. I always love talking to you. So I
All right.
appreciate your time. Thank
See you
you.
later.
See
Thanks,
you
Francis.
later. See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.
Okay.